Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was June 15th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is from the Secretorum Register of Violant, Register number 2056. This particular document is interesting on a couple different levels. The addressee is the King of Navarre, Charles III, the person who infamously now Violant was dancing with too hard in 1396, and she wrote to him a little while after saying that because they danced so hard, she had had a miscarriage, and that she was going to name that child Charles after him. She wrote that to him directly. So they've got an interesting relationship. And so I have a theory that they knew each other because Charles III, before he became king, was in France, in Paris, as something of a hostage during a time of tension between his father, Charles II, and the French king, Charles V. So I think they knew each other. I'm not quite sure exactly how far apart in age they are, but they're in the same generation for sure. Violant signs this letter. Her title, La Reina, appears at the end of the text block. And so, we have to be a little bit careful about what we're saying when we use the word signed. This just came up in a discussion I was having today in my Latin practice group with Dr. Graham at the University of New Mexico, because these weren't like flourishing signatures. I mean, we've had a couple occasions in the podcast where we've taken a look at what the outgoing documents look like, when they're all folded up, and there is no real signature. The signature, if it was going to be like the most elaborate official level of signature, would often include some kind of like a diagram, like an elaborated cross of some kind that was a specific shape and had specific additional circles and lines to designate that it's sort of like heraldry in a way. And sometimes you see the elements of heraldry in those little signature shapes, the kind of medallion shapes that get made in order to signal that the monarch has been there to authorize that document with their own hand and offer an additional level of signature in order to grant that particular document that heightened level of legitimacy and clout. But for the most part, you instead see that there has been the wax seal applied, and there's not really a form of the monarch's name that indicates that they personally signed it. There are a couple instances where it appears that the monarch did personally write their own name at the end of the letter. We don't really, I think, have any, I'm going to have to think about this, but I'm pretty sure that we don't have any full-on letters in the registers that were actually copied in there by the monarch, because, like, why would they? These are the register, these are the archival copies. So they might have written occasionally in their own hand for outgoing letters. I think it was almost 99.9% of the time that they were dictated. Or not even that they were dictated, but they were written and then shown to the monarch, and the monarch said, "Yep, that's good," because it was nothing controversial. This letter today, though, is to someone who is a familiar and someone who is of a high status. And so I have a feeling that this one today was dictated. Although we don't see all that much personal touch in this. It's actually very reminiscent of the letter that we saw Violant writing to her parents and her brothers 3 days ago. And in fact, the way that in this letter she describes to the King of Navarre the condition of Joan is almost like word for word the same. So we see the construction of accidents paired with forts, but here in this letter, it's forts accidents et molt. And what's really interesting is actually, I just noticed this as I'm looking at it, I think there's been some kind of erasure. Yeah, look at that. All right, so we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, line 7. The way that the illness was originally described, I think has been rubbed out. And I think they were able to somehow erase. Oh, gosh, it really looks, especially below the word molt, like there used to be a letter with a descender and a horizontal, like maybe the word perilosos, which follows molt, was actually put ahead. And I don't know why there was a change there, but it just goes to show that they are very anxious about how Joan's illness is referred to. So, molt perilosos. Okay, we've got a letter in in Catalan, it seems, and maybe with a little bit of variation that leans toward Aragonese sometimes, but I think it's mostly Catalan. And so perilosos is interesting because I would think that to make that plural in Catalan, it would come out differently, like perils, but I'm not too sure about that. This whole phrase here, you can see the anxiety just jumping out of the paper. I mean, there's been some kind of interesting change in the word order that has been erased over. The language is a little bit odd. That perilosos, I'm not sure if that's how you usually pluralize the word peril for peril, danger. So you can see it, right? And then in the next line below, you can see how the word, I think, journe was left out. So in the letter from 3 days ago that Violant wrote to her family, I think that there was a phrase in there that every day he's getting better. Tot journe. And here I think we've got an attempt to say the same thing, that every day he gets better thanks to the grace of God, right? So again, we have shifted from a denial of the severity, because before, in earlier months, we would only hear from Violant if she's writing to someone like the King of Castile or the King of Navarre or the Duc de Berry or her mother, father, brother. She would say only, Joan is convalescing well. and she would not admit that there was danger. But now it is standard practice to admit that there was danger. So that's interesting. Further down, we have a standard update for the health of the children. The children are healthy. And then we get to something really interesting. We get to, let's see, what line is this? It's the 6th line from the bottom. And Violant starts this sentence where what we really get into it is in actually the next line, but the sentence starts there, and there's a name in the 5th line from the bottom, Mosen Ramon d'Abella. And then we have the grand displeasure at the end of that line. What she's saying is that she has found out that that Charles III knows, sapiats. Okay? You know that this Ramon d'Abella is in your kingdom and house. So that's interesting, that it's not just the kingdom, it's the regne e casa. And Violant is saying that she is not pleased, grand displeasure. And so what is he asked to do? He's not told to arrest him or send him, but Violant is informing him that that Ramon d'Abella fets per son linace contra la persona del Signore, that through his lineage there has been action against the person of the Lord King. So, linace, lineage. This is interesting because Violant doesn't say brother or father or nephew. She's not specific about the relations, so it's possible she doesn't know. Or it could be that linace here has a kind of resonance, that she's activating a certain understanding that if you are related to somebody who did something treasonous, then you are connected, and that blood connection is not something that you can get away from. It is a link. It is a lineage. It is a line. So it could be rhetorical here to use linace versus saying brother or nephew or cousin. Well, who's being referred to? Bernard d'Abella was executed. According to Geronimo Zarita, we have documents that we looked at back in late April about Bernard d'Abella being arrested and his property confiscated because he was an advisor to Sibylla de Fortia and was suspected of carrying out some evil actions against Joan, and he was then executed. We don't have documentary evidence that I've been able to find of the execution, but I think that Geronimo Zarita, when he was writing in the 1500s, he had access to some kind of document that showed that the execution of Bernard d'Abella took place, and he lists a date. So Rita says it happened on April 29th. So this person, Ramon d'Abella, is most likely some kind of close relative to that Bernard d'Abella, who was a known associate advisor of Sibylla de Fortia and was executed. And then we find out from Violant that the suspicion against the advisors of Sibylla de Fortia is that those advisors had carried out evil sorcery, had cursed Joan, and that is what caused his near-death attack of an illness on the night of April 28th. So that's the whole kind of tip of an iceberg in this document with the mention of Ramon d'Abella. So there's no request to have the King of Navarre send Ramon d'Abella back to basically extradite him. But Violant, I think, is asking for a response here. Like, you need to do something about this. I'm letting you know that he's there, that his linaje is treasonous, and you hopefully, it's just implied. There's no direct request in this letter. It's like there's no statement of send him back. And we have seen requests to send prisoners to Barcelona. That's something that has come up in other documents, so it's something she could have done, but instead she's just informing her molt carcosi, her most dear cousin, Charles III of Navarre, of this presence in his kingdom and his house of Ramon d'Abella, whose lineage had acted against the king. The probata for this document, I forgot to talk about that. I kind of just jumped right in there. It is one that's entirely understandable, Domina Regina, and it's interesting because Regina is spelled out. That's not the kind of thing you see very much. The decision to spell out Regina in full, that's interesting. Domino Regina mandawat mihi, and then second line, Pedro de Besanta. So this is Pere de Besant, and it is direct from the Queen. There's no presence of a vice chancellor or chancellor in this document, so I think that when we see something like this, we can say that the monarch has had a very strong hand in the composition of this document. One last thing to point out, I just want to say there's another instance where we see the equivalent of molt cara compagnona. So when Joan talks about Violant, he loves to use that phrase, molt cara compagnona, which, of course, is the name of this season of the podcast. It means most dear companion. And when Violant is talking about Joan, she will say something like Marit nostra molt car signor, or molt car Marit. And here we have in this document another reference. We don't have the molt car, which is interesting, but we've got del signore marit nostro. Is the absence of the molt car something that we should read into here? Maybe, but I would hesitate to say that we should read into that too much. But it is interesting that Charles III of Navarre gets the molt car, but the signore marit nostra does not in this document get the molt car. Don't quite know what to make about that. The feast, the children get the molt. Oh no, that's still molt carcosi. Nope. The children do not get a molt car. That molt car belongs to Cosi. So yeah, that's an interesting little thing there to notice. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job, because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.